So why is consistency so important? Why do people often say that being consistent is the key to your breakthrough? Because a lot of times we come out of the gate really strong. We come out of the gate really fast and really hard. But soon that strong way that we came out of the gate, it soon becomes a jog. That sprint becomes a jog, and that jog becomes a very slow walk. Then it becomes a crawl. Then it becomes nothing at all. So why is consistency important? And then here's the thing, why are we as people not as consistent as we would like to be? The first thing I'll tell you is this: being consistent or not consistent is not a disease. It's not something that some people are able to do and some people are not. If you're not consistent in something, there are reasons behind it. But consistency is one of those things that, especially for our business goals, for our life goals, a lot of times it takes a really steady pace to get to where you're going. And most of the time we do things for a little while and we stop. And then we start back, and then we stop, and then we start back. And we never we never understand why we are always just right at that same position again. It's kind of like priming a pump. Now, if you're not from down south, you've never been in the country, you probably don't you definitely don't understand this reference. But let me explain it to you. Priming a pump, long time ago, there used to be like these pumps where water would come out, right? But you had to prime it. You had to prime this pump enough for the water to come out, which means you had to be consistent, right? You had to keep going. And in essence, that sounds pretty simple. It doesn't sound like a hard task. But the more and more you prime this pump, it got a little stiffer. It got harder. It got a little bit more difficult to prime. And most of the time, people would just give out, right? They would stop. But what they didn't understand was that the water was right there. It was about to come out, but then they stopped and the water went back down. So when they started back priming the pump again, they are starting literally from the beginning all over again. And that's what we do with a lot of our goals. That's what we do with a lot of things that we say that we're going to do. We start out and we start priming that pump and we're going every single day. And then we start to slow down and then we stop and then we pick it back up again. So consistency is something that is extremely, extremely important. And here's a good tip on how to remain consistent. First and foremost, if you find something that you're not consistent on, the reason you're not consistent is because it is too much for where you are right now. That's it. It's too much for where you are right now. What do I mean? Let's just say if at the beginning of this year, you said, I am going to be consistent with working out. And you started out and you said you were going to work out 5 days a week for an hour per day. That was your thing, right? And you started out and you may have made it the first 2-3 weeks with that. And then that 5 days became 3 days, and that 3 days became 2 days. And then now you haven't been to the gym in the last 2 months. It's not that something is wrong with you. So I don't want you to look at it from that perspective, because we'll start saying, well, the gym is just not for me. The gym is not for anybody unless you make it for you, right? But we'll tell ourselves those things. So then we'll say it's not for us and we'll quit and we'll never go back. But it's not that. It just means that those 5 days a week, it was a great aspiration. It was something great to say, but you weren't on that level yet. And because you put yourself there and you forced yourself to do something that was too much for the time or too much for where you were at the time, you quit. So the best thing with being consistent is that to do something small and master that first and then build your way up. Maybe you're in business for yourself. And maybe you say, I need to talk to people every single day, or I need to network every single day. And you tell yourself you're going to network with 10 people a day, but you've never been consistent with networking with one person in a day. So 10 people, it's not going to really happen because you haven't built your way up to that level of consistency. Start with one person. Start with going to the gym 1 day a week for an hour and do that consistently for a few weeks, and then add a second day or add a second person if you're networking or whatever the goal is, and build up. Build your way toward something. Build your way toward being consistent with the 5 days a week or the 10 people a day. But when you start out up here, you typically crash. And now when you crash, there's a whole lot of psychological things now that stop you from being consistent. Because now psychologically you associate whatever that thing is, you now associate it with pain. You associate it with being something hard and something painful, and you're never ever as a human being gonna willingly do something that you consider painful or that you consider hard. So you're never gonna be consistent with it if that's the case. So understand that you gotta do things steady. You can't start and stop all the time. A lot of you guys right now, you have several open doors in your life. You got this business that you started, you got that business that you started, you bake cakes, you're in network marketing, you're in affiliate marketing, you're learning how to do Amazon. You got all of these things and none of them are really working. Why? Because you haven't learned to kind of back up a little bit and be consistent at one. Being very consistent with solidifying one thing, and then once that's solidified and you've been consistent and got results there, you can add on and move on. But we try to do all these things in a very high level at one time, and typically consistency just doesn't work like that. So we have to look at it, because if not, what you end up doing, you end up becoming somebody that you're always just in that moment. What do I mean? You're excited in the moment, you're very passionate in the moment, but it doesn't last, and you find yourself spinning your wheels over and over again. And in business especially, not being consistent is probably the worst thing you could ever be in life. I don't care if you're not as consistent on the level that somebody else is, that doesn't really matter. What matters is that you're being consistent on the level that you are at the time, and you're able to now progress and get better and more consistent at higher levels. That's what consistency is all about. So you got to understand it. You got to be able to look at yourself first and foremost and say, well, I'm not consistent, or I'm a procrastinator and I need to change that. Because being successful in this life is really just about looking at yourself daily and looking at the necessary adjustments and not making excuses about them, but just being willing to make the changes that are needed. Remember, I always say success comes from the inside out, but even that is something that you have to practice. You have to practice learning to believe for things without the negative emotional discord or the negative emotional vibrations. You got to practice that, though, on a regular basis. It can't just be something that you do one time and then you never do it again. I heard somebody say this example, and I thought it was perfect. They said that, learning to produce from the inside out, or learning the strategic mind of business, or getting better at your life, or unlearning all of the stuff that we've learned that's not really a part of the system of success. They said it's not like a college degree. It's not like something that you go for 4 years or however long and you get it and it's forever yours. No, this is a day-by-day process. Consistency is something that you got to work on every single day. And when you see that there is something, a part of you that is not serving you well today, be willing to make those changes. Don't just say, well, I'm not consistent because if this was better, then I would be consistent. Now you're making excuses. Or you're saying, well, I'm not consistent, or I'm a procrastinator because everybody in my family, they're procrastinators, and that's all I saw growing up. So procrastination and doing things at the last minute, that's just a part of who I am. I will challenge that way of thinking every day of the week, because there are a lot of things that we believe that are just the way we are, and it's not true. There's a such thing called learned behavior. Learned behavior, which means that you may have learned it at a very young age. You may have the influence from your family of procrastinators, or your influence of people that do things at the last minute and stress themselves out and they're not consistent. You may have that influence and you've learned to be that way, but it's not a part of your DNA, right? It's not just who you are, it's what you learn to be. And the reason you have to look at it in that perspective is because when you understand that it is just who I've learned to be, you also understand that I can learn to be something else, right? That's the beautiful part. But when you continue to tell yourself, this is just who I am, I'm just somebody that's usually not consistent, or I'm just somebody that's a procrastinator, I always have been. When you start to tell yourself those things, it indicates to you that you can't change it, and that's not true. It's just like the famous statement of people that tell me, RJ, I'm not a morning person. And I always try to find out, where is the morning person gene? Like, are some people born with this and some people aren't? Absolutely not. You just told yourself that for a number of years. Therefore, you believe it. Therefore, you create whatever it is from the inside out. Your mind says, I'm not a morning person. Therefore, you wake up cranky, tired, and frustrated every single morning. But you don't have to be that. That's a learned behavior. You can change that. So if you can change those things, you can change if and when you're not consistent. You can look at it and you can find out, am I just doing too much at the time? And if you're doing too much at the time, again, back up. Just back up. Back up and start to put small steps in place. Remember, this is not necessarily a sprint to the finish line that we're doing every single day. This is your own lane, your own race, your own process. Be okay with yours. Stop looking to the left and to the right, because when you do that, you start paying attention. Well, I have to be just as consistent as this person, and they're consistent on this level, so I have to go there. Not true. Be consistent on the level that's most comfortable for you at the time. Get good at that, and then move on and add on and go forward. So consistency is really the key to the breakthrough. What are you doing every single day? What are you doing day in and day out, no matter if the sun is shining or if the sun is not shining? What are you doing? What do you let slip every single day? Those are the things that we need to pick back up. And this is kind of your, mid-year almost checkup. Why? Because a lot of us said a lot of things starting the year that we were going to do that we have let slip, that we're no longer being consistent with. So we just got to pick those things back up and learn to be consistent on the level that you're on. With that being said, you guys, remember, success comes from the inside out. So perfect the inner you, perfect the way you think, perfect the way you believe. And more importantly, when you see that there are things that aren't productive, be willing to change those things. Because if they're not a part of your DNA, if they're not something that you just absolutely can't change, meaning how tall you are, the color of your skin, all of these type of things, those are things that are just a part of your DNA. But the way you think, the way you believe, the way you procrastinate, the way you do certain things that aren't serving you well, most of those things are learned behaviors that you can now unlearn and learn something that will take you to the next level. All right, you guys, with that being said, RJ Hodges, as always, the art of mastering you, success from the inside out. And remember, being consistent is something that you must do to build a successful, sustainable life and business. Take care.